night is the Rangers Journal night.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Rangers Journal. The season has finished in fantastically disappointing fashion, but you can never get Rangers fans to stop talking about the club in some way or another. And we're here today to talk about Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. Now, as we'll remember, Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was appointed Rangers manager in November 2021, succeeding Steven Gerrard. And during this time, he led us to a Europa League final, secured the Scottish Cup. However, an inconsistent league performance and poor results led to his dismissal in November 2022, less than a year into the job. So here to discuss this with me, because I'm not going to do it alone, Scott Cameron. How are you today, Scotty?
I'm good. I really look forward to this one. And Gio was a player that I admired greatly when he was with the club. Always spoke very well, and I was reasonably happy when he was appointed. You know, so I think there's so many talking points across the spell that he was manager. You know, and it's just a shame that it never ended more successfully.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by Robert Harron. How are you today, Bob?
Yeah, not too bad, guys. I'm looking forward to speaking about Giovanni today. I'm sure we've got a good few points to get across.
First thing, Gerrard leaves us mid-season, but he leaves us in a good position. We were linked with a few people, and then I guess he became the front runner, Giovanni did. What was the initial expectations when Giovanni was appointed, do you think? Go to you, Scott.
I think it was just try and continue the success of the previous season. To be honest with you, you know, I think it had been a bit of a turbulent, not turbulent, but it hadn't been the greatest start to the season, which obviously resulted in there was a lot going on behind the scenes. I think with Steven Gerrard and the board and what have you. But you just hoped that 55 season was just going to be a continue. You were just going to continue. You've won your first league title in so many years, and it was just a case of keep winning trophies. You know, I think that's the remit of a Rangers manager, and I don't think that was anything different. Certainly, my expectation of Gio was just to continue, hopefully in the same vein that Steven Gerrard had.
Bob, the fans' reaction at the time, what did you make of that, to his announcement or to him being appointed?
I think initially it was probably one of favour, just because he was a fan's favourite. He was a previous player, as we all know. He did really well through a successful spell with the club, and he went on to be successful. Following that at Arsenal and Barcelona. So I think initially the fans were receptive to the appointment. Clearly disappointed that Gerrard left to go down south, especially at that point in the season, because it was still early on. If it had been at the kind of a clean break at the end of the season, or maybe even at January, it might not have been as painful to the fans as it came across. But I think when once we kind of were made aware that Giovanni was the front runner and he was going to get the job, I think everyone seemed really quite receptive to the appointment.
I know I did. I remember just refreshing my news feed when there's a plane coming over. Somebody had tracked a plane from Amsterdam, and I was looking to see, and then was there not pictures of him getting out the plane and stuff like that. I was really excited because I thought he'd done well, not only as a player, but he'd done well as a manager as well. He'd had a few achievements. What do you think his biggest achievements for us, Bob? What would they be, do you think?
I think, obviously, overall, I think it was getting us to the Europa League final and winning the Scottish Cup. I think the fact he came in, he managed to get silverware within that first season that he was appointed. Maybe not obviously the full season, but for the majority of that season, to get us through the kind of cup rounds domestically, but obviously more so in the Europa League to be able to get us through to a final, which probably none of us expected to see, especially what's happened to the club over the last kind of 10, 12 years, to be in another European final so soon after returning to the top league in Scotland was probably, surprising to the club, never mind the fans. So I think out of the two, I'd probably pick the Europa League run. To get to the final was probably more than what we expected at the time.
Certainly more than I expected. Cammy, can you come in and tell me when Lundstrom goal goes in, and then when the final whistle goes and you see Gio in the park, can you remember your feelings from that night?
I think there was a bit of emotion, I think it was tears of joy sort of situation, I was in Florence back in 2008 when Nacho scored the penalty to send us to Manchester, so it was very, very similar feelings, those I think those Thursday nights, those Thursday nights will live with me till the day I leave this earth. It's just unbelievable. I mean, even the emotions across that night. Obviously Jimmy Bell had passed a couple of days prior to the game. He was obviously a massive part of the dressing room and what have you. And I think the emotion was intensified even further, and he scored early, and then Glenn Kamara scores, and then they get the goal back, and then Looney scores, and I mean, my God, we're going to a Europa League final again. It's just, it was the limbs, as the kids call it, in the stands. I'm up in the club deck, and everybody's like falling over rows and what have you. It was, and I think there's a YouTube TNT. I've got like the YouTube, the 10 minutes after the final whistle. I mean, I think I've probably watched it. I think there's about 30 million views, and I think I must have been about 10 million of them myself. And it's something that even when you're searching on Rangers on YouTube, that you if you're feeling a bit low, you just think, that was one of those in your top. It's probably in my top 3 nights watching Rangers. It was unbelievable.
The same kind of feeling for myself. We were on holiday in the Netherlands at the time, and I'm just watching it on a computer or a laptop. And at the final whistle goes, I'm just completely drained. And you're lying there. My wife came out, thought I'd had a heart attack the way I was sitting. But feel free, Bob, to still talk about your feelings of that game as well. But I want to move on, because I think you're right. His key achievement clearly is getting us to the Europa League final. He done everything right on that night, I think, as well. To be fair, we go ahead in the second half, and for a better choice of foot by Connor Goldson, we might have won the game outright, and then by the choice of a bad penalty, to be fair, by Aaron Ramsey, he walks away with that trophy. What was your feelings of that night?
I think it's so contrasting. I think it's kind of Cammy touched on, the semi-final, we were in such elation. I think the emotion of the night, for me anyway, was probably overwhelming. That final whistle, to know that we'd made it through with Jimmy Bell passing, and even earlier, kind of that year, with Walter passing away as well. It was that kind of, everything kind of just came to the boil on that night, probably perfectly for us to go through to the final. But when we got to Seville, I think it's such a disappointment to look back and go, what could have been, as you said, that kind of, to go ahead with Aribo again, never thinking that you'd probably see another goal from Rangers in a European final for a long time to come, to see that, to go ahead, to then lose the goal in the manner we did, against maybe complacency, maybe just, as you said, a lack of concentration for one moment in time. But to go to penalties was excruciating. I wasn't in Seville on the night. I was in my kind of local Rangers club with my dad, and yeah, just to see, it's so difficult, because I look back and I think to myself, Aaron Ramsey was picked, as part of the 5, and as much as a lot of people blame him, I try not to. I think it's, we should have done more, maybe over the 90 and the 120 minutes to win the game. I think we certainly had players to do it, considering the season we were having at that point. But yeah, just probably the overall feeling was disappointment not to win it, considering probably for our generation, 2008 was probably still in the back of our minds to have made a run to Manchester to get there and probably, deservingly get beat off of Zenit on that night. But maybe there's a tinge of, bitterness towards the Frankfurt game, just because we probably had a squad capable of winning it. It's maybe just come down to a wee bit of luck, as you said, Billy.
The significance really can't be underplayed, Cammy, can it? But for us as a club, I mean, I do put us. I know the players played the matches, but there was no doubt Gios' tactics in Europe was the main reason for me that we got to the final. Significant as a club. What does it mean to us really then? Going forward as well, for our aspirations in Europe and going forward with that.
I think it shows that what is possible. I mean, I never ever thought that 2008 I never ever thought at that point I would see Rangers in another European final. And that's not been negative or it just. And then obviously what happened in 2012 and the journey back and what we've obviously had to. But it shows what is possible. I mean, I was just sharing with my son the fact that Fiorentina back in 2008, we knocked them out, got to Manchester. They've played West Ham in a conference final, I think it was last year, got beat, played another European final, and Fiorentina aren't, I would say, any bigger than Rangers. They're playing in a bigger league. But I think the way European football's changing, I think that it's possible. I think we as a club have, I think, across the period since Steven Gerrard came in, I think I've been very fortunate and I've seen Rangers massively successful, like you guys in domestic football, but far better Rangers teams than recent years have struggled in Europe. So I think we have rebuilt a bit of credibility and a reputation in Europe, and I think that if you think back of that, as I said earlier, the run to Seville, the Thursday nights, the Ibrox atmospheres, the teams that we beat, sort of thing. I mean, I think it's just a real shame that this group of players and Gio aren't immortalised now as legends. I mean, it's like one penalty kick away, but you just keep it, as Big Marvin said, keep believing that you can get back to another European final. I mean, I would love nothing more to see one in my lifetime and my son to be with me, sort of thing. So you just keep pushing and hopefully we can get back there again.
For me, it gave me the pride again to be a Rangers fan, and as I say, I was over in the Netherlands at the time, and I'm telling everybody, did you watch the game? And everybody now knew who we were again. They seemed we were off the map for so long. So for me, he restored that pride on the European front, and although it didn't go particularly well the following season, we've got that expectation now that we can go far, and maybe not the Champions League, but certainly the Europa League. Moving on. What do you think, Cammy, was the main challenges? Because as I said earlier on, he inherited, not the greatest of circumstances, but we were top of the league by a few points. What were the main challenges he faced when he came in?
I think a lot of this squad were ingrained in Steven Gerrard and Michael Beale. I think they had been coached within an inch of their life into this is the way that we are going to play. I think so I think it's getting the players on board. You know what footballers are like, that within the first, I mean, I've listened to many a podcast where they always say that within the first 30 seconds of a manager's walking into a new changing room, their first messages determine what moves forward, sort of thing, So I think the immediate period after he came in, I think he got the old manager bounce, when I think it was clear that the players had sort of taken on board what he was wanting, and then obviously we managed to qualify for we got out our group, Sparta Prague, I think it was. I've got a recollection of beating Sparta Prague, Alan McGregor having an absolute world day of a save. So I think that he got the players on board very, very quickly, and I think that's always a challenge with players, that they're very loyal to the manager before. But I think that there was no signs of any hangover with regard to that.
Bob, taking into consideration any injuries, did he have a big enough squad depth, do you think, to finish the league by winning the league? Sorry, did he have the tools there? Should he have done it?
I think so. I think just as kind of Cammy touched on there, I think when you look at it, and I know we could probably come up to date and say the failings of the last couple of pre-season has probably resulted in the loss of the league title. But I think at that point in the season, because we had the pre-season with Gerrard and Beale, Gio came in and tactically maybe gave us a bit more freedom to play. It maybe wasn't as rooted in fitness at that point. But again, as you say, when we got through to the latter stages of the Europa League, especially the extra time against Braga, then obviously they went into the semi-final against Celtic in the Cup, and that was extra time. I think when you look at it from there, we probably had the physical fitness to really do better in the league. Maybe your eyes are distracted with the Europa League because we had come through such kind of massive ties and went the distance in at least a couple of those games in that run. But I do think, looking back, to my mind, there wasn't a lot of injuries. Your probably a major one was Ramsey coming in January and never really getting a lot of game time, which again, looking back, is probably not been the greatest of business decisions. Yeah, exactly. Especially towards that latter half, and again, I think there's been numbers of debates on whether or not, if Morelos had been fit for the final, would we have won it. But in the same regard, if he had been fit, in that second half of the season, we certainly could have and probably should have went on to lift more silverware than just the Scottish Cup. So I think depth-wise, we were in a decent position. It's maybe just been key injuries to those one or two players, as we said, Morelos and Ramsey, especially Ramsey coming in with such massive clamour, because at that time you're looking at it going, that's a a kind of blue chip signing, for lack of a better term.
Cammy, one thing that I was wanting to compare is because you touched on Gerrard earlier on, the changeover, but tactically, what was different about Van Bronckhorst's setup from Gerrard?
I don't think there was massive differences, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that he was far more sort of possession based. It was a bit wasn't the most exciting. I think the horseshoe was the expression as we got to the latter stages of his tenure, But I just thought him and his staff, the European arena tactically, I think back to the night that we played Dortmund at Ibrox, and they gave us a bit of a runaround, to be honest with you, in the first half. And I can still remember talking to the boys that sit round about me, and I was like, this is ropey sort of situation. But he made wee sort of tweaks at half time. I've got a recollection of Morelos and Kent almost playing as a front two, and it wasn't quite 4-4-2, but just the way that he set up, and Morelos and Kent in that second half against Hummels, which is actually insane that Hummels is going to be playing in a Champions League final on Saturday night, only a couple of years after he's been ragdolled by Morelos. You know, it's but I think the European games, I thought he was very, very, him and his team were very, very good at just, I think he said himself, I like to get a look at, I think it was he said, once I've had a look at the opposition, like when you've played them and the way it worked out, we generally we went away, and then the return game was at Ibrox. It was obvious that he spotted wee things in the first leg and was able to sort of tinker with his own. So that I think that's his major skill set. Him and his team tactically in Europe, he was top level, to be honest with you. Certainly from a Europa League point of view.
Mm-hmm. I'm no tactical expert when it comes to these football terms, but Bob, did you notice any tactical changes from Gerrard when he came in?
I think there was maybe just more emphasis on maybe being slightly more attacking in the European games. I think you're probably looking at a major difference, you know, with Gerrard's philosophy being maybe more British based, because he's played in the Premier League all his career. He's obviously British. Whereas Gio comes in with maybe a slightly different philosophy, being Dutch. Being, you know, again, we all remember the Advocat era when it was very technical. It was 4-4-2. You know, it was the total football expression that the Dutch come up with, which you think maybe Gio was trying to implement in maybe an evolved way, you know, just because of the players that he had at his disposal at the time. So I'd maybe say tactically, your prime example is maybe looking at Calvin Bassey. I don't know if that's where you're maybe going, Billy, but to me, moving him from, you know, a left back to the kind of left centre back position just seemed to work wonders for us, where, you know, he was strong, he was physical, he could take the ball, he offered an attacking threat on occasion as well. So overall, I think there was maybe more technicality to Gio's approach than Gerrard's. But again, that's maybe where the drop-off was in the following season, where we maybe didn't have the physical fitness to back up the technical aspects of the play that Gio wanted us to play on.
I'll stay with you, Bob. Do you think it's fair to say that the players he had at his disposal weren't the right ones to take that amount of tactical knowledge on board?
Probably. I think, again, in hindsight, you would definitely, I would 100% agree, Billy. I think, and it's difficult not to touch on what obviously has come out recently when he was saying how he was looking at Mats, and we knew he was looking at Veerman as well, and how well these guys have done respectively at PSV and at Borussia Dortmund, especially as Cammy touched on the fact that Matson's went from kind of being on loan from, I think it's Chelsea to Burnley last year, and he's now in a Champions League final with Borussia Dortmund, and not saying he's any great shakes, but you know, if maybe Gio had been backed maybe in the summer more so than the January window to bring more technically minded players in that he was looking at, his philosophy may have been more successful on the pitch.
How do you feel about that, Cammy? Similar thoughts?
It's funny because I think you bring in a Dutch manager and you don't sign any Dutch players. You know, I mean, I think that was always a sort of regular topic of discussion sort of thing. But I think obviously the recent media that he's done, I think a lot of the players that were mentioned, we were aware that they were on a list, and I think the centre half. I think obviously what's happened with regard to us trying to sign a centre half this summer is very similar. I think Dockley, I think the boy's name is. I think he was probably prime target. He wanted a centre half two years ago, and here we are in 2024, and we're facing similar difficulties. But I think the issue that Gio probably had was that he didn't get his first targets, and I think a lot of those players were, I think, part of the recruitment conversation that it would have been happening with him and Ross Wilson. They would have been the names that he would be like sort of pushing, and for whatever reason, we've not been able to get those players, get them to Scotland, agree. So I think the problem that Gio had was he identified players, but he maybe ended up at about his third, fourth, fifth choice with the players that eventually came in. Were the players that came in his pick sort of thing, or was it just a case of we've got a list of 10 players and this is the sort of, you know, I still question how much influence he had across a lot of the signings that summer. I think he identified a lot. He identified a lot of players. He identified a lot of players, but unfortunately wasn't able to get his players on the part, his players signed, sort of thing, you know, which would have potentially enabled him to maybe put more of his stamp. You know, I mean, it's things haven't changed a lot in the last 2 years. We're almost in a similar world with regard to trying to bring in and put his stamp on this side. I think he achieved a lot with somebody else's squad, and I think it is a frustration. And I think Matson, I think Bob mentions, and I think Veerman and Dockley, and you know, I mean, there's a lot of good players were identified, but I don't think it's just the fact that he wasn't backed. I just think there's attracting players to come to Scottish football, as massive as Rangers are, is a challenge, and I think that was a challenge for Gio that summer, and I think it's a problem that we will continue to have to attract the level of player that we want to the club.
For me, we're not going to know what happens in boardrooms or what happens with players if these first choices decided not to come, or the board decided, or Ross Wilson decided not to go for them. I tend to think that the stuff that's coming out now, I think it was his assistant that was saying these things recently, wasn't it? That he at least feels that they didn't go after his first targets, and if he'd been backed to the level that say that Beale had been backed last summer, then he would have been more of a success. But how do you feel about that, Bob?
I can't help but agree. I think, you know, as you said, I think guy's name's Dave Voss was the assistant manager at the time, and you know, again, maybe you compare it to this summer. You know, I know we're in the early stages of the summer window. I know the transfer market hasn't even opened as yet, but you know, the fact that you look back at last year, Beale was given, say, 15-20 million to spend. Those signings over the course of this season, we've all touched on through the various pods, haven't hit the heights that we expected them to or hoped they would. If that money had went to Gio the year before, would Gio still be manager? That's debatable, but you know, we would have had a better chance to implement his philosophy on the team, to get as kind of, as Cammy mentioned, you know, get his players on the park that he wanted. But again, it's so difficult that probably both sides of the old firm see it, that attracting players to the Scottish League, the main incentive is probably Champions League, European football, and that's not always going to be the winner in any discussion. I think when you're looking at it, you're going, you know, you might be playing Benfica one week in Portugal, but then you're playing Dundee at Dens Park the other week. You know, then the following Saturday in a you know, slanty, waterlogged pitch. You know, it's not really selling them the dream to come and play for us, as much as as we all agree, we know we're a massive name in European football. I think the last couple of years we've probably done well to kind of attract players of a relatively good standard of quality, but trying to get those, for lack of a better term, top elite level players is always going to be difficult for us, because we can't offer the same wages as down south. We can't offer, the only real attraction is European football, and if we don't have a run like we did under Gio, it's very, very tough for those players to be motivated, in my opinion anyway, to then, if you get knocked out, you're then playing just Scottish football, and it's maybe not the most attractive of teams and grounds that you're going to on a weekly basis.
One thing I've been proud of growing up, at least, was that we didn't throw away managers at the drop of a hat. We only had, I think it was single digits in my lifetime, at least, the managers. That was something to be proud of. And I'll put this to both of you. Do you think, given more time, he could have turned things around if we were more patient fan base? Say we knew that this season was going to be gone, or sorry, that season that he left was going to be gone. If he'd got another summer, could he have turned it round and been a success?
I'll take this one. See, that just quickly, while to go back to the transfer aspect of it, the one thing I think that after we knocked out PSV, I think he done an interview, and I think he I know it's like 10 minutes after the final whistle, we've got a fantastic tactical performance. We've nicked a goal, qualified for the Champions League and the riches of the Champions League. That point, I think it was very, very surprising. I would love to know what happened, what conversations happened in the period between knocking PSV out. Could he have been backed at that point to get an extra body, an extra quality player in with those extra cash in? So that's just, it was in my head there, and I wanted to say that's something that, what conversations had happened. Right, this is what happens if we do qualify. This is what happens if we don't qualify. As it is, that nothing happened, sort of thing. So I think
Can I come in, Cammy?
Of course.
I just really want to agree with you. I don't think he says those things if he doesn't think he's getting another chunk of money to spend. So something's happened after that. But sorry, on you go. I just wanted to say that.
Aye, so that's something that's still it's still a. I don't know if Gio would ever sort of come out and say, the actual intricacies of the conversations, but I'd imagine any sort of conversation across the summer, and as again we always come back to where we are today. Similar conversations, I would imagine, are happening just now with regard to potentially qualifying for the Champions League. Fast forward to the end of August 2024. You could be in a similar situation. So it's just something that I think that there was a lot of feel good off the back of a great result. I don't think any of us expected to get that result in Eindhoven that night. We were all buzzing, and then I think it sort of took the wind out the sails of the support as well. You think you've got the 25-30 million, manager saying that we're going to bring a player in and blah 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 blah, and then nothing happens. So things could have been might have been different. But I think your question there, Billy, was about patience, and I laugh. Rangers fans and patience. It's not something. I think the problem is that domestically, he'd had a couple of beatings across the city. I think the February prior to playing Dortmund, and then the run to Seville, we got a doing in a midweek game, and then obviously the first game after we've qualified for the Champions League, we've went across there and we've taken a doing as well. That's, I think, patience. I think there's always patience when you see progress, and I think you see signs of Rangers are rightly or wrongly we're judged on trophies and beating Celtic and what we do domestically. You know, enhancing a European reputation and everything is brilliant. But the bread and butter, as they say, cliche, central, but is what we do domestically. And I think you have to be seeing signs of progress with regard to what we're doing in that environment. And I think the defeats to Celtic, I think, and you know, I think that plays a, you know, I know personally there was some Rangers fans with absolutely no patience would have binned them after the first gubbin at Celtic Park, which I think is crazy, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think the one after the Champions League was so damaging. You know, I think that I consider myself quite a level-headed and patient sort of person in the main sort of thing, but I think that there's only so many times you can see yourself get a doing by them, and I just think that that's unfortunately the nature of the nature of the beast. You have to be competitive against them. You can't continually be second best sort of thing, you know. So I think that patience is there, but it has to be balanced by progress and victories against them, to be honest with you. And I think there's only so many defeats you can take. So but patience and the Rangers support isn't really something that goes hand in hand for me.
I understand, Bob. I don't think it was as toxic as when Beale was leaving. I don't remember Gio's teams getting booed off at halftime or anything. Was that more to do with we liked Gio, but we just knew it wasn't working, and we thought maybe we've been done by a charlatan when it comes to Beale? Is that why it was so different a reaction?
I think probably, Billy. I think you look back and obviously Gio was a fan favourite when he came in. You know, he scored big goals in big games. I think he was, again, as you said, and as we're touching on, he probably had credit in the bank because he was a fan favourite. He was a previous player. He knew the structure of the club or the philosophy of the club before he came in. He comes in as a foreign manager at that point to probably have that bit of patience rather than maybe a Scottish or a British manager. I think, probably going back to your question, I think if he had been backed, he probably would have been given more time, as Cammy touches on, if he had been making progress in the league. I think the comments after the Champions League win against PSV to not then get the backing was probably that sowed the seeds, especially amongst the fans, to say, right, well, if the board aren't backing him and giving him the money giving him the money, backing him by buying the players that he wants to bring in, coupled with the heavy defeat to Celtic and then the very first Champions League game against Ajax when we get done over in Amsterdam, it really very quickly set the ball rolling on him on borrowed time. Maybe I got among some fan groups, but for me, I think you're trying to be patient enough to go, this is still not his squad of players. I mean, even as Cammy touched on, when you bring it back to this season and this close season, you're still looking at players that, you know, Pedro Caixinha brought in, which was 6 years ago, and you're going, we really should be, you know, getting people through the, you know, I say revolving door, but they really should be really implementing a player trading model. And I know there's arguments on that, and I could probably have another completely different conversation on that. But for me, Gio was and always will be a fan favourite. Will always be welcome at Ibrox. I don't think that's in doubt. I just think the board at that particular moment in time should have backed him. And I think, again, as we'll probably kind of touch on, the fact that the defeats didn't help him. I think if he maybe had his own players, that may have been different. But you're then looking at the fact that even in that run when he was under pressure, to then have his eventual successor in the stands for a game was poor foresight by the board as well. And again, it comes back to that part of the board where, you know, there should have been a bit more tactful, maybe a bit more subtle in their approach to, and maybe that's where the seeds were sown to go, all right, we got through, we got the money for the Champions League, but we're happy just to sit bottom of the group and not even make an effort to get into the Europa League. So it's always a tough one looking back.
What was said when he joined is he knows the league, he's played here, but I don't remember teams playing the low block that they used to when he was a Rangers player. I'm going to leave this with you because I just need to go away for a second. But when it comes to things like fans media, we all listen to podcasts and stuff. Do you think that's the reason they didn't get any more time, was that podcasts and everything were all, and forums were all talking about how he needed to go?
Cam, if you want to take it.
Yeah, sorry, Cam, you go.
Aye, well, I think we're in a world with regard to social media and fan media and all that sort of stuff is a huge. It's you know, I mean, it's 24/7. It's information is out there. A lot of groups have got an influence. I don't think it's I just think it's opinion. It's fan opinion as much as anything else. I don't think that there's any witch hunt. I think a lot of what is certainly by the very vast majority is considered opinion based on what you're watching, you know. And I think what you believe. I don't think there's any. I don't think any of it is sort of, what is it they used to when Arsenal TV. I don't think there's anything that's Arsenal TV content just for likes and just for reaction and you know, sensational comment. I think Gio, like I think all Rangers managers, and I think he got a fair crack at it with the Rangers support, you know. Just while it's fresh in my head, one thing that I think that I think you asked early on, Billy, about what his greatest achievement was, and I think undoubtedly the run to Seville, getting us 20 million for Calvin Bassey in the space of 6 months can't be underestimated. So I think that's something that's been in my head, and I think Gio and his staff, and I think the tactical approach in Europe particularly, that allowed, I think Bob spoke about the much vaunted trading model. I think Gio and his team, and I think the Rangers board owe Gio with regard to, and that's where you go back to, he's managed to get us 20 million by his handling and development of Calvin Bassey, but hasn't had it back, sort of situation, you know. So I think I was saying, Billy, I think he got a fair crack of it by the support, and I think we all just give what we consider to be honest opinion on what we're watching, particularly domestically. There was I don't think there's any comparison to the hostility and toxicity of Ibrox in the sort of September, October time just past. I think we were all it could have, Gio leaving could have probably happened even before we started the Champions League campaign. You know, it was one of those, we almost just kicked the P45 down the road, sort of thing. You knew it was going to come. It was just a matter of when. But I don't think there was any, and I don't think even now anybody has got any bad words to say about him. To be honest, it's just, I think we're all quite disappointed the way that it ended.
I do like your point about Bassey, because we'll never know if Gerrard would have played Bassey in that position, I suppose. But he's obviously spotted something in him, and that him realising that potential, even though Bassey's the one that does the work, but it's him that spotted it. I feel the same with Clement as well, by I'm going to say Ross McCrory. Looking at Ross McCausland, the previous managers didn't let him train with the first team up 5 times in a season or whatever, and he's noticed something in him. So I like that was Gio had that about him as well, that he could spot something and made us a huge load of money on that signing anyway. Overall, guys, we'll have to bring this to an end at some point. How do you feel about Giovanni just now, Bob? And overall, the whole thing overall.
Yeah, I think just what we've been saying. I think it's probably the overall disappointment that he did so well in that kind of first half, or his first half of the season, the last half. That run up to Seville, probably not getting the backing in the summer, and then obviously subsequently the kind of poor results against the other side of the city, and in that kind of first Champions League campaign that we'd been so longing for basically 10 years, to be so poor in that campaign. We'd rather not go into it, but it's the fact that we've not been back since. We're hopefully this summer coming we'll do better again. Hopefully the Clermont gets it back in, but again, overall disappointment. Gio himself I'll always hold in high regard as a player, and as a manager, you've got to again give him respect for taking the reins of Rangers. Any manager comes in will always be given some form of backing or not. I think as you said, Billy, I think over our time, there's been a very small amount of managers taking ownership of the club, and out of those, you're probably looking at 1 or 2 that have really not had the best interests of the club at heart. Obviously the previous manager to Clermont, and maybe as I touched on, the Portuguese Pedro. So to me, Gio, I think will always be held in high regard. As I said, I think he'll always be welcome back at Ibrox in any capacity. And again, I'm from a general standpoint, I'm actually looking forward to seeing what he goes on and does in his managerial career.
His legacy, I guess, is a bit like he was great in Europe, but not good enough, or not tactically astute enough for the league. But whether that's the players or not, Cammy, to you, there's not many Rangers managers of late that will welcome back in the door. Unsuccessful managers, and even Gerrard, I don't know how welcoming would be to him coming back for a visit, but it says something about Van Bronckhorst that we would all gladly shake his hand and pat him in the back if he ever comes back to visit.
Definitely. Do you know, it's funny you mentioned Steven Gerrard, and it's funny how time passes, and I think it wasn't nice the way that he left, but I think a lot of what he said that summer after the 55 season, you look at what he said then. So I think, I'm a bit older. I remember Graham Souness when he left Rangers back in 91, it will be. And I remember Graham Souness coming back as a manager of a team in a testimonial. It was like, I'll say Ian Durrant's testimonial or Alan McLaren or whoever it was. And Graham Souness getting booed by the Rangers fans because of the way that he left. So there's Graham Souness, that was a hugely successful manager. But you look at the Graham Souness now, he's almost revered by the Rangers support, and I think they love any content that he does, and he talks about the club and blah 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 blah. So Gio, I've went off on a tangent there, but just try to give a bit of sort of context with the guy. I think Gio always conducted himself with a touch of class. I think he's always been a very good speaker and what have you. I mean, it's I think we hear from our managers so often at pressers and stuff like that. I think there was an element of I can't actually listen to him at a press conference any longer, and I think that's what happens when the the mood within the club across that Champions League and the injuries, and it must have been very difficult for him to do. But I think he always remained professional and classy from the day that he walked in as a player to the day that he left as a manager. And I think I said in our chat that history will be kind to Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. I think he will be always fondly remembered. I think it's just a real shame that he isn't going to be revered as a Europa League winning manager. You know, I mean, it's small margins. It's very much like James Tavernier should have been a Europa League winning Rangers captain. You know, and they are then, you know, you're then forever. You're never going to buy yourself a beer in Glasgow forevermore, you know. But I wish Gio well, and I as very much like Bob, I look forward to seeing what he does with his life and his future career.
Thank you very much, Cammy, for your comments today. Bob, can I come back to you just for a final thought? And the whole thing is Giovanni Van Bronckhorst as Rangers manager.
Sure, I'll try and keep it brief. But yeah, I think excitement when he was appointed and when we were looking to bring him in. I think, you know, as Cammy touched on, he'll always be remembered fondly for the run to Seville, despite the disappointing result. I think you can't take away his accomplishments as a player, and that's maybe what's going to shine through more than his spell as a manager. But I think it was maybe just unfortunate circumstances with the club at the time that he wasn't backed, he wasn't given the support that he was looking for to improve the squad. And we're essentially 2 years down the line and we're still looking to improve the squad in parts from that 55 winning season. So overall, happy that he was a Rangers manager. Just disappointed the way that it went at the end.
Well, again, thanks for joining today, Bob. All I can say personally is Van Bronckhorst is a thoroughly likeable manager. No one's more disappointed. Maybe he's more disappointed, actually, but I'll say no one's more disappointed in me that it didn't work out, because I was really excited about him coming in, and it is just a shame the way it ended. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If this is the first time you've seen our show, please subscribe. The more people we have, the more people get to see it as well. So please subscribe if you can. So thanks once again to my guests, and thank you for listening.